Hello everyone, good morning. I'm really excited to be hosting the first webinar from You, My Sister. My name is Rebecca Morden. I'm an artist and an activist with a long history of working against male violence. And I'm really honoured to be here today to be introducing a really inspiring lineup of speakers. I'm a trustee of You, My Sister, which is a very unique, quite new charity, which is set up to support women who have exited any branch of porn and the sex industries. And we have quite a unique mental health programme specifically for survivors, which has been described by some of its users as life-saving. So we're really proud of some of the work that's doing. In July, we launched our peer forum, which is a positive space for women who've left the sex trade to share and brainstorm solutions to the problems that they might see and acknowledge from what they've been through. And I'm thrilled to be hosting this first ever webinar, as I say. And some of the wonderful women that we've got here today, I'm extremely excited to be listening to them talking about their life after the sex industry. We usually hear, we sometimes, not often enough, hear from women who are in the trade, but it's quite rare that we hear the survivor's voice, I think. And it's really inspiring to hear what they've moved on to do. So I'm going to start sort of straight away. I'm very excited to be, first of all, introducing one of our first ever patrons, who's a very inspiring poet. I've known Rebecca Mott for a very long time. We've done a lot of work together in Reclaim the Night and other activist forums, and incredibly powerful poetry for a short film that's being made about her as well. And she's going to talk to us now from quite a wide depth of experience. So Rebecca, can I please hand over to you, and everyone welcome Rebecca Mott.
Hello, it's a great honour to be part of this meeting. I thought I'd start by reading two poems which are connected about trauma. Telling it as it is. Would you listen if I really told you what it's like? If I said there are no happy endings, only death? Would you listen if I said the pain is constant, that it interferes, that it destroys concentration? Or would you say, I can't hear the pain, tell me about your strength? Would you listen if I told you I was afraid of sleep, afraid of my body? Or would you say, I can't, you're a survivor? Listen now, I am sick of surviving. Now I will tell you, the terror, the sickness are always with me. I just hide it because others want happy endings. And this one is specifically about prostitution. Only count. Count the money, don't think where it comes from. Count the money, don't hear voices saying, this is not me. Count the money, don't speak the truth. Count the money, don't hear his voice saying, you are mine. Count the money, don't feel as your life seeps away. Christ, don't count the money. Think I'm not worth this. Don't count the money. Hear your voice pleading to keep you. Don't count the money. Speak, shout out, no more. Don't count the money. Hear the lies as he can never capture you. Count the money, feel the pain, and choose to live. I first started writing as a poet, which is why I began with poems. And gradually I wrote a blog, which I would call poetical poetry, poetical prose. Or I tend to call it witness writing. I'm very honoured to be part of this meeting, which spotlights where we are in the present and looks to the future selves, To make a future, it is important to have a stable and life-affirming present, whilst acknowledging where we came from. I feel that I finally have that stability, which brings a sense of peace and a space to reflect. In that space, I can see my past in indoor prostitution. I see only in fragmented memories. I have body memories. I see as I write. I see when I speak in public. In my safe presence, I finally can see my prostituted self. I can give her a voice, allow her to grieve, and give her permission to have fury. But mainly, I have started to give her back her humanity and maybe a slow start to some kind of justice. The peace and stability I have found was after a long and terrifying journey of mental breakdowns, body memories, and a recovery of what it is to be human. A major factor to finding this new way of being was moving from a big city into a small town. I have found living a slower life, a life with the routines of the seasons, a life where it is normal to talk when shopping. I have found that this has suited me. It gives me the space to grieve, the space to stop and see what I can do, and what I can do alone and what I need help for. I needed the good part of my family and a few friends. I moved to be near my sister and her adult children. Finding them was a major factor to my healing. I found that I belonged in my family, for only my mum and my stepdad were the abusers. Nature is part of my life, but not in a deep way or a new age way, just a remembrance of when I used to love bird watching and an artistic sense of beauty. I look at nature through Turner's eyes, not in spiritual ways. A love of a change of seasons is amazing when you live on the moors. I have always had a magpie brain going in and out of interest. Over many years, well, over a lifetime, I have built a deep interest in many aspects of popular culture. In that, I have a deep interest of music of all types, but mostly American music from many genres from the 20s to the 80s. I'm a lover of rugby, cricket, and mostly football. I can watch all ages, all genders with a passion and joy. I love the social history of team sports, in which I would include baseball. My love of, I also have a great love of films of many genres, though I tend to hate modern rom-coms, for I tend to be more into the screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s. I particularly love Hollywood films from the 20s to the 40s, especially the classic horror, screwball comedies, musicals, and film noir, and any film that has a star in it. I cover my Facebook page with images from the 1870s to the 1940s and music from the 1920s to the 80s. I want my Facebook to be my playground, though I also place some of the abolitionist posts there as well. That is who I am now. I can only speak from that place. If I had any advice, it would be to find your passion, find people who can be your family. There is no simple road to healing, especially when you live in a culture that says nothing happened bad to the prostituted women. So why are we still complaining or demanding justice? All I can say is that finding exited women who demand justice, who live with the shadow of trauma, that makes the fight that is what makes us fight harder, and it is a lifesaver. I tend to say that I'm a radical exited woman, for I fight to destroy the sex trade at its roots, not to reform it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was really powerful and moving. And it's really interesting to hear about the strength that you found in that quiet life, and to hear it articulated so beautifully is really inspirational. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, who's coming to us all the way from Israel. It's Luba Fine. She's a campaigner and a very successful one, because Israel has recently criminalized the pimps and supports all those who exit the sex industry, and they've also sort of deconstructed the stripping industry, which is of course the glamorous front to the sex industry, basically. Luba is writing a book of her interview process. It's got over 100 women interviewees who've exited from the sex industry, and she's going to talk a little bit to us today about their stories. I'm really fascinated to hear what she's going to say to us. So Luba, can I hand over to you, please, and welcome. Thank you so much for making time to join us today.
I thank you everyone. Thank you, my sister, for this opportunity. And Rebecca, your speech was so powerful, so shaking. I just can't come down after it. I came today to talk with our audience about the extreme importance of NGOs or projects like You, My Sister, projects that offer support to the sex trade survivors. These NGOs are extremely important, and they should be funded by state. And I came to tell you why. I will start, with your permission, I will start with the personal story of my dear friend, the sex trade survivor, and her name is Shirley. My friend Shirley managed to leave prostitution after the violent sex buyer beat her up brutally and nearly murdered her. She said, "My fear of opening a new page in my life was tremendous, but the fear of dying was bigger." Like most women in prostitution, Shirley had no savings. Young women in prostitution often earn a lot, but they fail to save money. These women have typical problems like compensatory behaviors, drug and alcohol addictions, exploitative friends and families who take all the money to themselves. Nearly every survivor I know exits devoid of all financial security and skills. That said, my friend Shirley was still a young, beautiful woman, intelligent, expressive, charismatic. This new page didn't seem impossible for her. And Shirley was also lucky. A female friend invited her to move in with her and agreed to wait for rent money until Shirley received her first salary. But Shirley could not find a job, even a simple blue-collar one. Sometimes she did not manage to get up on time. In the morning, after a night full of nightmares. Sometimes, on her way to a job interview, she experienced sudden anxiety attack because of the fear of being recognized, or even without any reason. She would run then back home and hide in the safety of her room. Many employers didn't want her because of the gap in her CV. In addition to that, she acted too insecure in job interviews, even when she applied for a minimum wage job. One day, she finally managed to find a job. It was a simple job in a post office. but she was fired 2 weeks later after breaking into an argument with her co-worker in a fit of rage. She did not even understand what happened to her. The manager didn't understand either, so he decided just to get rid of her. Shirley did not feel worthy or capable of anything. All demons attacked her again and again and again. She went back to drinking alcohol. The roommate also hinted that she will not be able to wait much longer on the rent. Shirley considered returning to prostitution, the violent, abusive, but so familiar world. Moments before she took that step, she found a Facebook page for a support NGO for women just like her. At the NGO, she met a social worker. Shirley wanted to find another job immediately, but the social worker quickly recognized that Shirley was not ready to reintegrate into the labor market. Instead, she referred her to a rehabilitation hostel. During the rehabilitation period, Shirley was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, a common phenomenon among trauma victims of different sorts of trauma. PTSD symptoms include nightmares, flashbacks of traumatic memories, avoiding activities that remind of the traumatic event. Sometimes it can be avoiding men in general, inability to sleep, constant feeling of danger, and much more. After a year-long rehabilitation period, Shirley continued to receive disability benefits and other social rights. She received them for 3 more years and didn't work. The same NGO had continued supporting her. Only after 3 years, she started her first job with charity that rescues abandoned cats and dogs. It was a perfect job for her. She sought as little interaction with humans as possible. You never recover fully. Without the exit services funded by state that I have mentioned, Shirley could find herself on the streets or back in prostitution, or both. The more she stayed in prostitution, the more aggravating would her problems become. You may ask whether Shirley is exceptional. Absolutely not. According to Israeli data, the users of aid services for prostituted women have various and severe mental health challenges. 27% have experienced psychiatric hospitalization. 31% have attempted suicide. 50%, that's half, suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And other 40% have other mental illnesses. Maybe Israeli data is exceptional? Also not. In groundbreaking research, Dr. Melissa Farley and her colleagues interviewed 854 people from 9 different countries. All are people in prostitution. The researchers found out that 71% were physically assaulted in prostitution. 33% were raped, and 68% had PTSD. In another study by Raymond and her colleagues, also among prostituted women from 3 different countries, the researchers found that 30% of Filipino women, 33% of Russian women, and 77% of US women reported head injuries. For the above-mentioned reasons, the Nordic model countries provide funding for exited survivors to access various services and needs: housing, jobs, healthcare, longer-term support services, tax debt forgiveness, trauma-focused care centers, exercise of social rights, vocational training, educational integration, many, many various services. While working on this speech, I called my friend, my other friend. She is a founder of one of our aid NGOs. Its name is Don't Stand By. This special NGO is focused on the peer and community support for the sex trade survivors. Amazing, right? So I have asked my friend, tell me please, why do the survivors you support not go back to work? I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear the professional. And she said, because these women suffer from deep trauma. The manifestations may vary. Some have major depression, some have PTSD, some suffer from severe anxiety or low self-esteem. Many are lacking vocational skills, many have drug addictions, but all of them have one thing in common. They need cure. Another problem facing prostitution survivors on their way to freedom is compulsive money spending. I want to focus today on this particular problem for two reasons. One is this problem is being often overlooked, and another one that I have suffered from it. At the beginning of my speech, I said that women in prostitution sometimes earn large amount of money, but they have no spendings. It happens, not spending, no savings. It happens because the women spend a lot. Many, as I have said, have addictions or exploitative families, but there is something beyond it. Even without all the above mentioned factors, women in prostitution spend money impulsively. I want to talk about it today because I am familiar with it. Impulsive spending is extremely ubiquitous and has many contributing factors. I would like to point out just a few main ones. 4. The first contributing factor is the feeling that the money is dirty and worth getting rid of. The second factor, the desire to compensate yourself for what you went through. Sometimes this desire is subconscious. The woman feels deep inside that she has undergone a horrible experience and she deserves now to pamper herself. The third factor is the need for self-image recovery. I remember myself saying other people, how can you patronize me? You count pennies until your salary and I wear fancy clothes and go everywhere by taxi. And the fourth and the last factor I would like to mention is simple self-destruction. The survivor says, I do it to enjoy, to pamper myself because I deserve it. But in practice, it turns out that the woman deserves to live without savings, without any tangible property. It is also subconscious. She feels like she doesn't deserve anything good. Survivors are not always aware that they have a challenge to overcome. Many women live in denial. I, for example, was afraid to get out of prostitution because I failed to save anything. At the same time, I earned 4 times the average salary. So I was thinking, what is my chance of surviving on the minimum wage? It's 0. But while we survivors might be unaware of this problem, many business owners are aware. Next to many prostitution areas in different towns and cities, you will find satellite mini industries of luxury brands, jewelry, and gray market lawns. The business owners know their target audience very well. The target audience are severely abused women with an excessive amount of cash. Those women don't own property, but they will buy diamond earrings that cost thousands. And if they don't have enough cash for the diamonds, business owners will offer them credit. If they don't pay, they will take a risky loan from the gray loan market. Many women can't exit prostitution for years because of those expendable loans. Long time ago, in my days, we had no aid organizations. But today, many women come to aid centers and say to the social workers, you know, I would like to exit, but I just cannot survive on a regular salary. I earn tens of thousands. The founder of one of our aid centers shared her secret with me. What is her secret? She tells the survivors, you earned a lot? Great. So you probably have savings. You can fund the loan rehabilitation period. You don't even need the national security fees. Only then survivors realize that they have no savings, which is most likely due to a problem. Our biggest challenge is that we don't get rid of this problem right after exiting. Impulsive money spending accompanies survivors year after year. Even after decades, I hear from the exited women claims like, I deserve a dream vacation. I suffered enough in my life. Or, do you think I will take a bath only by taxi? Survivors continue to compensate themselves for the suffering, which never ends because the trauma is rarely entirely over. But we must recover, and we deserve to recover. Among the hundreds of survivors whom I met, the ones who managed to rehabilitate completely usually had this rare ability to cope well financially with little income. I met a friend like this a few years ago. She lived on Social Security benefits in a small apartment in a lousy area, but she has decided to not work for a year or two and focus on her own mental health. 2 years later, she took a part-time job, and now she is working full-time and making art and inspires many other survivor women. I saw this woman in her small, simple apartment and realized that her life is amazing compared to many of us, because unlike many other women, she is never afraid of tomorrow. She is not terrified by an unexpected expense. She is not living in fear of a debt collector. She had a great life. Luckily, our aid NGOs also aware of the problem. One of the NGOs that I have interviewed has a unique program that helps prostitution survivors to manage financially. But it may be not enough for women to implement the knowledge, because the knowledge is not enough. They probably need also prolonged trauma treatment, because trauma is what creates the need for compensation in the first place. Otherwise, without treating the trauma, reduced economic conduct would be like a weak diet. It will be followed by impulsive eating. The problem needs to be addressed and handled from the root. And this is yet another reason for why the sex trade survivors need deep, long-term healing and not quick fixes. These are women with PTSD after suicide attempts, rape, head injuries. Some of those women can spend the entire salary or national security benefits in 1 week or in a couple of days. These women cannot quickly reintegrate in the normative society. Of course, some can exit prostitution and find a job and pay rent. It happens. But on the contrary, some women are so traumatized that they cannot even do the bare minimum. Without professional help, these victims will go back to the streets, back to prostitution, and as the years go by, they suffer more and more, and there is less and less chance for them to reintegrate into a community. This is why NGOs like You, My Sister, are so important. And that's why they must be funded by the state, by the government. We can only stop prostitution if we have resources and work side by side with survivors, never leaving them behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luba. That was absolutely brilliant. I always feel like I learn such a lot when I listen to you speak. And I think that that speech that you've just given really proves why we need to look at the entire experience, not just a snapshot of a moment in time for someone in the sex industry, but why the survivor's voice is so powerful, because it can cover before, during and after the entire experience that a person has in prostitution. And I think what you've just told us lays out why that is such a vital thing in if we're to tackle and change this is not just the industry, but the society that we as women all live in. Thank you so much for that, for those powerful words. I'm going to introduce our last speaker now. And I'm also going to just quickly draw your attention to the Q&A section that's going to come at the end. I'm sure, having heard Rebecca and Luba and our next speakers, you have things you want to mention or ask. And I think that it'd be great if we could put some of those questions into the Q&A chat at the bottom, and I'll come to them after our next speaker. So have a little think, pop things in there, and I'll be keeping an eye on that and can come back to them after we've heard from our next and last speaker, who is Chaucer Cameron. She's recently written a book very fittingly titled, In an Ideal World, I'd Not Be Murdered. And it's been reviewed very brilliantly as a brave, layered piece of work, in turn heartbreaking and hilarious. So I'm very much going to be reading that as soon as I can. And it's put Chaucer into very high demand. We're very lucky to have her today. She's juggling a lot of speakers' engagements and things, and she's going to both talk to us today and also share a short film with us, which again, through the medium of Zoom and tech, we're hoping will go smoothly. I'm aware that even when I'm talking, sometimes it's saying to me, you have unstable internet, so I'm hoping we're coming across to you okay, and I'm not getting too glitchy, and I hope the same thing happens with the film. Bear with us if there's any tech issues. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. And luckily, first off, we're going to hear from Chaucer herself. Please join me in welcoming her. I'm going to hand over to you, Chaucer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here today, and thank you for everybody coming, and really interesting talks from Luba and Rebecca. Thank you so much to everybody. I'm just going to start here now. In my experience attending events and conferences about prostitution, I've obviously noticed that time is spent on sharing personal histories, and these often take the form of testimonies and autobiographical storytelling. Embedded in the storytelling structure are references to the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why, and the H, the how. And this focus on storytelling is vital, as it enables agency and gives witness to experience. It encourages debate and discussion. It educates and opens up a space to be seen and heard. And this in turn enables the possibility or probability that one can more than survive afterwards. In an ideal world, the aim is to thrive rather than survive. However, I do have had concerns about the retelling of these stories with all the accompanying traumas, and I think there is much to be gained by adding a balance to the storytelling narrative and structure of an event, and to focus on what is positive in the speaker's life, other than just managing. So it's really, really good to have the focus on exiting and afterwards. In order to share my experience of exiting, I won't be revisiting the darker parts, but I need to refer to one significant event that pushed me into prostitution, because I think to know why you entered into the industry in the first place is the key to enable you to find a way out. In 1976, I was sent to Hackney Hospital, to the psychiatric wing of F Block, which is situated in Homerton High Street in Hackney in London. It's now closed. I was sent to a psychotherapist who worked in the hospital, and he sexually abused me for over a period of years. The police recently informed me that he took his own life a long time ago. I believe I was one of a number of women he abused, I'm sure of it, at the time. And in hindsight, I can see the obvious link between his abuse, me being groomed, and my entrance into prostitution. He was one of the main reasons, really, apart from other things. I also stayed in the industry for a long time because I actually encountered sexual abuse, or the cover up of sexual abuse, in every single organisation I came into contact with, every single one. I've gone through all of the organisations. I can't think of one that I went to that didn't abuse me sexually. So there was nowhere safe for me. I couldn't find anybody I could trust at the time, and everywhere was blocked. So now I'll talk about my experience of exiting. I have to say it's rarely simple or linear. You don't usually leave and everything is fine. It's often the case that you already have problems when you enter prostitution, and you simply get more problems. As we've heard today, you simply get more problems while you're in it. That's my experience anyway. So leaving is not straightforward. It takes effort and time, but I'm living proof. I'm an older woman now, and I'm living proof that it can be done and all things can be overcome. You can get out and you can live an okay life. My exiting experience included a number of strategies that I'll list. Firstly, there's the act of listening, accepting support, a change of scene, and a new way of learning. So the act of listening, what does that look like? The first step for me was to get off drugs, because for me, that came with the territory. I couldn't do one without the other. It was my body's decision. My body was packing up. It was dying on me at the time, very much so. But I was fortunate because I got to the point where my body hurt so much that I could not move. And I recognized that I would die if I didn't stop. That act of listening for that very brief moment to my body was enough for me to start stepping away. I didn't get clean straight away, I relapsed. But basically, in that moment of clarity, I made the choice to live. And that was really important. So I started stepping away from there. Accepting support, that's really hard to do, especially if you've had organisations that abused you. But I was fortunate. I came across a group of people who articulated my experience. They validated and supported me and showed me there was a different way to live. And mostly that was through the language that they used. They named things for me, things that I didn't know at the time, like the word patriarchy. I didn't know those things at the time. This was a long time ago. Rape, consent, paedophile. So, for example, the man who used to pick me up from junior school in a flash red car was actually a paedophile. I didn't know that until, not long ago. He was not my boyfriend. He was actually a paedophile. The therapist that I thought I had loved had abused me, broken boundaries and groomed me, and he was grooming me to take my life, and that was very clear. but instead he took his. That was the reality, and that naming of things was fundamental and profoundly liberating, to name these things. And it was, in effect, another step away from prostitution as well. A change of scene. Well, exiting for me did mean moving away from London and from men initially. I had to learn to live by myself, because at that time my relationships with men were destructive and built on toxic behaviours, hurt and abuse. They were non-relational interactions. And I wanted to relate to people. And that's what being human is all about, isn't it? What it should be. It's part of being fully alive to relate to people. And in an ideal world, you do that. But in prostitution and drug taking, you can't relate to people. It's non-relational activity. So a new way of learning. The first step was my decision to go back into education, to go to university, to use the language I was beginning to learn about. And so these steps I took, the act of listening, accepting support, a change of scene, and a new way of learning, eventually enabled me to start speaking out. I then went to the police about the hospital abuses in the wake of Me Too, really. And that process of speaking out acted as a catalyst, and was the start of my writing career as a poet and creative and filmmaker and festival organizer. A new chapter. So here I am now. I have recently published In an Ideal World, I'd Not Be Murdered, which is here in the book, which explores the impact of prostitution. The book is part memoir, part fiction. It's expressed through poetry. It's not a political tract. It's an attempt to open up conversations between people, both in and out of the industry, all groups, all people. The book includes real and imaginary characters, mostly female. They have names such as Crystal, Ellen, Morgan, Eve, Amy. All characters are at different stages of their lives. They all have their own beliefs, dreams, hopes, hurts, aspirations. And the character stories are based on myself and people that I knew and know. Some aren't here now. So how has writing helped me? Well, it's taken over 30 years or more to create an emotional distance enough for me to write. For me, I believe that my poetry mediates the experience of prostitution. And by that, I mean that it acts as a way in, a conduit, a portal or channel, much like an internal therapist. I couldn't have a real therapist because I associate them with abuse, but I had my own internal therapist. That was my strategy. And it enabled me to analyze, interrogate and revisit experiences through the characters' lives. Poetry offers a safe space, an intimate space where I can explore the past, and yet it provides the distance I need to think about the past and not get drawn back into unhelpful actings out. I employed the use of characters and plot and learned that not only was I able to reenact the past, but also to understand what happened and speak about it. I'm now going to read a number of poems and hopefully finish off with the film. If the film doesn't work, it's okay, we'll leave it, but I'll give it a go. The first poem comes from the book, which is In an Ideal World, I'd Not Be Murdered. It's called 128 Farley Road. I find him at the bottom of the stairs. The strange thing is his eyes are blue with flecks of grey. I could have sworn they were brown, a dull sort of brown. But then again, the mask, which often hid his eyes and always hid his face. Apart from one time, years ago, when I caught him naked and alone. Now in death, that face looks so serene, clean almost. I'd often worried that the rubber marks on his jawline and forehead and just beneath his eyes would pit his skin so deep he'd be scarred for life. But here we are, just he and I, gazing at each other, the way dead people do when caught together intimately. One thing troubles me. I say this in a whisper so not to disturb the dust that's gathered. How did this come to be? This flat, these walls, they're crawling with dead girls. I know the rules. No names, no dates, just numbers. The next poem is called The Green. I think some people can relate to this, or many people can relate to this. It's called The Green. The bus stopped at the edge of the green. It was a dark winter evening. Ellen still had a 20-minute walk home. Bears, wild boars maybe, that rustling crack closing in must be animal. It took 3 days to discover the body. Reporters said it was hard to identify. Devoured, mostly. King's Cross Cafe 1. Crystal would always talk about her body. A body bought and sold ages so much faster, as if it wasn't real. Wounds, scars, than the general population. She'd often throw in random facts like that. King's Cross Cafe 2. If they knew I was a whore, she used to say. She had issues, kept secrets, mostly from her family. I often think of Crystal and wonder what we would have done if we'd had a different life. We spent a lot of time together when she wasn't high. King's Cross Cafe 3. The next time I saw Crystal, she hadn't had a fix. I want to be a journalist, she said. I'm fucking getting out of this. She was always asking questions, always wanting the story. In an ideal world, I'd not be murdered. In an ideal world, I'd buy a bigger place, a place where us girls could work together, their safety numbers, not afraid of getting busted or being murdered. I refused to compromise my safety, said Crystal, inviting strangers back to her room. But nights were always hard for Crystal. There's a safety in jeopardy, ain't there? Crystal loved art. Her bedsit, covered in posters from the 60s, blondes, semi-nudes, mostly murdered women. Her favourite chair, just a knock-off imitation, she called her Keeler chair. Crystal could have been a hoarder, but in fact she was a hooker. She was lucky, never murdered. She understood erasure, turned it into art forms, pinned it to the walls. Crystal knew what she wanted, and that was somewhere quiet, but not so quiet I'd get murdered. And then she'd giggle. She'd try to disarm you with laughter, but not really. So that's Crystal. And now the next poem will be Hooked. I think I need to screen share it. I'm sorry. Screen share it. Quick time that. Do that. And I hope it goes. Shall I share it? And then do that. And then play it. And I hope it works. I remember standing on a street corner, eating BLT on rye, thinking about my fluid intake. But despite my thirst, despite taboo, I aimed for the 3 crowns, ordered fruit juice, nearly.
Remember how we used to walk through little streets, snow, broken ice, small torn twigs, mist, open fire, mulled wine, cut glass, smooth stem.
It was an ordinary evening, drear, overcast. Outside the traffic was building, diesel fumes circled the inside of my nostrils. Air, I needed it. Exited, or tried to.
Inside this trace of warm we sit, a somehow place we lived. What a time was had back then.
It was raining, so I called a cab, considered my options, bent at the edges. The traffic was static. The traffic eased. The traffic was at a standstill. The traffic flowed nicely. The taxi turned right past Clissold Park to... It had been a long time since I'd been in that part of the city. I remember how quickly evenings turned dark, how my cigarette slid between seats, and my fingers, not as slim, not as deft as they once were, reached deep into the crease.
Did you catch it? A glimpse through fields, a bob of fluff, a dandelion clock.
Deep down.
The breeze.
Hooked.
Did you catch it? Remember how we used to walk through fields? Did you catch it? Remember how we used to walk?
I don't know.
That was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, Chaucer. Thank you so much.
Did you hear the sound?
Yes, from where I was sitting in my little bit of Hackney, I heard and saw all of that, and it was really, really a stunning piece of work. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. And had you, just to check I'm not cutting you off, had you finished your talking part of your presentation as well?
Yeah. I've finished it off with the film, if that's okay.
Absolutely perfect. I just wanted to check in case I was cutting you short in any way there. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. Absolutely fascinating. I have questions for our speakers, but I'd love to know if anyone has put anything in the chat. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to add anything in there that you'd like people who are listening to all of this. But just to give you a bit of time, I'm going to be greedy and selfish and abuse my position as the host here today by just starting off with a couple of questions. I have a question for Luba as well, but while we're on the subject of poetry, I'd love to bring Rebecca Mott back in quickly and just ask, I thought Chaucer's description of how poetry had been reconnective for her and the kind of process of poetry in her life as a survivor particularly, but as an artist as well. I thought the description was really, really fascinating. Is that the sort of role that you feel that poetry has for you, and is that why you were drawn to it, Rebecca, as well? What function do you feel it has in your life?
Well, I don't actually, I feel quite detached from poetry, so I don't think it was healing for me at all, to be honest. I like performing, so it's kind of like, to me, I see it like being an actress, and that you're performing. But I find that when I write it, I tend not to read it. I mean, I tend to be very detached from all my writing, to be honest. And I find that when I do feel it, I find it quite frightening. So I kind of prefer to be detached. But I sometimes wonder when people say writing is healing, because I think it can be for some people, but there's a generalness about that statement that I find disturbing, because it's almost like if we let people write, then they'll all get better. And it's almost like, I think there can be a lot of people who write with, but it doesn't even touch the, I mean, to me, it didn't, the writing doesn't make me better. It kind of sometimes can make me more ill sometimes, but most of the time, I think about the style of the writing first and foremost, and I think about the performance of what and I'm very much aware of the audience as well. So I have a really detached, almost scientific view of my writing. I don't really care whether it heals me or not. It doesn't, because it's not its job, you know.
That makes complete sense. Thank you, Rebecca. That's really interesting. I was just going to come back to Chaucer quickly and say I've been looking, just doing a quick cram about you, Chaucer, and having a look at all the different sort of the ways in which you've pursued artistic programs that are quite outward reaching, so quite the opposite of the detached job that Rebecca's talking about, in a way, because you're doing a lot of work with festivals, and so lots of different artistic opportunities that involve a more collaborative perhaps process. I was wondering where that sat with you in your current life. Wondering if you'd talk a little bit about the kind of work you do where you work with others, and how that sits with you.
Well, similar to Rebecca in a way. I don't particularly see the writing as a healing directly. I just write because I write. But it does, you know, what I've learned over the period of time with writing, it is connective, and it does connect. And with the book, for example, people actually don't know the world that we've lived in. They're intrigued by some of it, and they haven't seen it in that form. So they pick it up, and they've been really quite drawn towards it, and actually very supportive, very, very, very supportive, which has been a great surprise. Yeah, we collaboratively wise, people have been great around the book. It's done really well, and so for me, it shows that poetry can transcend, you know, itself, and it can speak in a different way, and it can get politics across. It can, but in a different way than writing a political thing, can, you know, and it's reaching people in a way that it needs to. That's what it was, you know, for, really. But I wrote it for, just because I wrote it for myself, but I wrote it to try to communicate with people. And the more you write, the more you understand. So it did show me aspects of myself that was hidden, and the more that I write about it, I can see, oh yes, you know, this is where I am, and that's what I've done, and that's, you know, that's where I disassociated, and, you know, so it's useful in that way. Yeah, that's
fascinating, and I think it's really good to hear that people have been supportive and as well about the process, because I know that's not always the experience that survivors have about speaking out about their experiences. So I'm really, really pleased to hear that. I'm going to just ask a question of Luba quickly, and then I'm going to come to a question that I can see in the chat down the bottom here. Luba, for that. Oh, you are fantastic. Thank you. I'm very aware that although it's very, all of your writing is very different, you're all very, 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 very impactful, powerful, articulate writers. And we could hear that from your speech, Luba. I was just going to ask you quite a different sort of question, really, which is just, I think Israel, their move to the Nordic model has been fairly recent. I wondered if, as a campaigner and activist and specialist, you could give us a bit of your thoughts on any differences or changes you're seeing since Israel's move over to the Nordic model. Is there anything that you think has changed?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, I can point out some changes, but first,
first I will start with one disappointment. The enforcement of the sex purchase ban is it doesn't happen as we expected. The very weak enforcement, and this is our disappointment. But on the other hand, the funding of rehabilitation centers and NGOs is very impressive, which is rise. We had many private projects and NGOs, some very similar to My Sister, and they run on private funds, which were always not sufficient. And now we got very excessive extra budget and from the state. And when you get extra budget from the state, it is always easier to get more private donations, and municipalities support more. And this is a beautiful side of this Nordic model implementation. In different countries, this law is implemented in different way. In Israel, the focus has always been on the rehabilitation. I would like to see, as I say, the ban enforcement more, but this is what we have. And another very interesting phenomenon that after the sex purchase ban was when the bill is passed, not enforced, just passed. Our NGOs got 300% more calls from sex trade survivors who were willing to exit. It was the feeling, maybe some women were scared that they will not have enough earnings, but we also felt like women understood that the society perceived them as victims, and they have right for rehabilitation services. So we have now more women who apply for rehabilitation. And this process is never easy. Many women get all the support and they cannot exit completely. This is a tragedy, but now we have more women supported, more funds for other survivors. And,
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you, Luba. It's really interesting to hear you say that about the enforcement as well, because I've spoken a few times over the years to women who originated the Nordic model in Sweden, and they said the first year or so they were really stunned by the fact that the sort of stats around convictions didn't really change, and they were concerned about that. And then they looked at the enforcement and realized they had to basically retrain the entire police force to understand why the laws had changed and to enforce them properly. So that Israel is not alone in that. I think that might be part of the process. It's fascinating to hear.
Say many people say maybe we need I don't know, I would like this enforcement to improve, but many people said maybe we don't need this criminalization, maybe we need first to try educate them. I don't like this idea. We don't educate rapists, we don't educate thieves, so we should not educate Johns. But I think that this first year, until the enforcement is better, maybe it will be our attempt to see how we can educate them without arresting them. Okay, we have the law, we have educational programs, we have public relations for the law, we have rehabilitation funds. Let's see, maybe the Johns will be educated and we don't need to arrest them. We are giving them this chance.
Well, I think certainly it would be good to look at it's the training of the police and the enforcers and the people who are trying to. It's that area, isn't it, where you have to go. How do we train policemen and the courts to enforce those laws and come on board with us? That would be perhaps, yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that shapes up and whether that changes the experience of the laws being enforced. Good luck. That's really, really interesting. I have a final question that's come out of the chat, which I'm going to slightly paraphrase to be addressed to all the speakers. I'm going to just slightly rephrase it, so I apologize to have asked, but it's to make it something that's appropriate for, I'd like to get a final comment from each of our amazing speakers today. And I'll just say before I do that, this webinar has been recorded, it's going to be online. Our newsletter to find out more. I'm going to put in the chat in the moment a contact so that you can find out more about our work. And we'll put up the website for You My Sister and an email. So while that's happening, artistically or through campaigns or both, are speaking out. And someone wondered in the chat, and it's a great question, I think, how do you find the balance personally between that being whether it being cathartic or therapeutic or even just sustainable, versus being sort of re-triggering or exhausting? That, you know, how do you personally achieve that sort of balance? Shall I address that to Rebecca first?
I think it takes a long time to learn how to get balance. I mean, and also don't worry about getting it wrong a lot of the time as well. You know, it's not, I mean, I feel that all exited women live with trauma as a shadow, and like a shadow, it goes in and out. It doesn't, and so therefore balance is not. I always feel like it's a bit like, I mean, I think everything is said in such sort of black and white ways these days. And I think we need a nuance about how we talk about balance as well, because balance is almost like a dance, that you don't know whether it's going to affect you or not beforehand. And I think you should not be cross if sometimes you're completely unaffected by things that other people are going, oh, that must be so terrible. And you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm fine, actually, you know, I'm absolutely fine. You know, I mean, and you feel guilty about being fine, actually. You actually feel guilty that you're happy. And it's like, that is the scariest thing for me, is that people find it difficult to accept that you actually can be fine when they're feeling upset themselves. And it's like, you know, I'm not saying that I don't care about their feelings, but it's like, really, it's not my problem, is what you feel like saying. I mean, it's like, and also, I think, to be honest, being triggered is always seen as a bad thing, but it can actually be deeply inspiring as well. It can actually inspire you into thinking, actually, that's something I haven't thought about. That is something that I actually have been running away from. And I actually think the idea of balance is almost like we're meant to be these people that can just speak out and just write, and then we're meant to be like crawling into a ball afterwards and being really upset. I mean, I always get people coming up to me and going, oh, that must have been so hard. And you feel like, actually, I'm professional. I am a professional. I do this because I know I can do it. I would not stand up on a stage, or I would not publicly read a poem, or I would not publicly write a blog piece if I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown afterwards, you know, because actually, if one of the things about what I do is that I personally want to be seen as a professional, not as a performing monkey, you know. And I don't need their pity. I need them to go out and do some action, or go out and learn more about prostitution. I personally feel that sometimes when people talk about balance or talk about, oh, that must have been so upsetting, they're talking about themselves. They're not talking about me. And I feel like, actually, do you really think I stand on this stage without preparing beforehand? Do you really think that? Do you really think that I'm not professional about what I do? And if you do, I don't have much time for you. Yeah, and that's actually my opinion.
That's really interesting, but also it shows what I think it shows what an amazing job that you do when you do get up there, Rebecca, because it moves people perhaps outside of being completely rational, but it certainly puts them in touch with their emotions, and hopefully that is a call to arms for people. Really, really great, fascinating answer. Thank you. Luba, can I address the same question to you? Is that okay?
Yes, it's okay, but while you were asking this question, you got frozen on my screen. So what is the question?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Just talking about how you, someone asked how you get the balance right between being able to be an activist or a writer or a speaker about what's happened to you as a survivor, and finding that without it becoming something that drains you or debilitates you? How do you, where do you find the balance is for you?
I don't know. I'm still looking for the proper balance, because I'm always overloaded, and I always owe some task to some NGO where I'm involved with, and I don't know. I'm always late, and I always feel guilty. So not proper balance yet. But I need it. I need this activism, which is very important, and it gives meaning to my life, to what I have. I feel like what happened to me, it wasn't waste if I do something for the society now, which is also important.
Brilliant. Yeah, really important. Thank you all for everything you're doing. It's fantastic. And yeah, don't feel guilty. You do amazing things. I've worked with Luba quite a bit through Philia, and I'm always hugely impressed and moved by working on speeches and things of her, hearing her work. It's always fantastic. Chaucer, can we finish with you? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
same question.
It's a really interesting question, one that I'm sort of battling with myself. And we've talked a lot about it. You know, I've talked a lot about it with other writers who are writing difficult material, and I've been looking in the poetry community for safe people and safe spaces to talk about this. I didn't expect you can't really totally prepare for what happens post-publication when you you put yourself out in that way with an actual book. And so I wasn't prepared for some of it. And writing and performing, yeah, there is a cost to it. And so I've been learning over the years, you know, what the cost is. And when I was reading and performing non-prostitution stuff, lyrical stuff, I could do that, and that was fine, and there was no impact. When I switched, which was relatively recently, into actually specifically writing around prostitution, it changed quite a lot, and I found that I did become ill afterwards, physically actually and mentally, which I probably had needed to do it a bit, and was a bit frustrated by that. And then so I talked to a number of people afterwards about their experiences of publication and also writing and reading this material, and a number of us do get, you know, sometimes physically ill or a bit mentally unwell a few days afterwards. And so how do we manage that? And so we put strategies in to, you know, maybe not do so many readings, or depending on your audience, what you put out there. And just to accept actually that time recuperating after you've read or performed, you recuperate and re-look at things. So that's been quite interesting. And it showed me how cerebral I've been in the past, and how it's changed from I've been very cerebral in my head for so many years and detached. And then now I'm much more integrated. Physically, my body feels hurt, you know, the hurt. But you just have to manage that, and have to start accepting those changes, that you come out of prostitution not the way that you go in. You know, your body's a different animal when you come out, and having to accept age and having to accept all those changes. So it's been really interesting. But I think the key thing is to get, I can see what Rebecca said about balance. Is you don't know how you're going to be when you perform and when you come out, but just to be very gentle with yourself and surround yourself with other people that you can go to and talk to about that. That was a bit of a tough night, but you know, it's great, isn't it? You know, the idea is that we get out there and we talk about the situation, and we listen to what people have. And it's great when people come up afterwards and say, you know, I used to be in prostitution, or my family have, or, you know, they come out with their stories, and you know that you've made a little bit of a change. That's it, really. That's all.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that you survive, and that you've survived, and I'm 60 something, and you know, I'm still alive, and you know,
and you're winning the hearts and minds.
got a good life.
Really, really brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, these are fantastic answers. I think everyone's been extremely moved and informed, illuminated by the speeches and talks we've heard today. I know I have, and I'm just really, I'd like to say again how a tremendous honour it's been to sort of hold the room, to hear from you all. Thank you very, very much. Please stay in touch with us, those that have listened, sign up for the newsletter, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you so much. Huge rounds of applause for our speakers today.